I'm an independent thank you very much. I'm an independent consultant based in Melbourne, and I work predominantly with Indigenous communities. And a lot of my time I spend as well trying to get the conservation coaches, community of practice of Indigenous conservation practitioners together. And as such, I'm leading this session. But aside from me, we have a great group of other co-presenters that are joining us today. We got Paula and Heather, both from Canada, who are gonna tell us later in the case study about their amazing work on a multi-stakeholder project in Canada in the Yukon. We have Irina and Gustavo. Irina and Gustavo are going to talk about their project of developing a guide for conservation planning with local communities in coastal Chile. Then we got Sam and Sarah, and they're going to reflect a little bit on healthy country planning in Australia. And we went full circle here, 10 years of healthy country planning, and we're going to hear from them about the experiences in Australia. And last but not least, we have as well Cristina here, and Cristina's going to talk about the coaching she's doing with communities in Ecuador and Colombia. Before we're going to jump into the session, maybe a few very quick ground rules. While we are in the plenary, I would like to ask you to keep your microphones muted with that many people together at the moment. If you have any questions, we have a breakout session after the case studies where it's probably the best place with that many people to ask any questions and to have a conversation with the case study presenters. And if you have any technical issues during this session, while I'm talking, please send a message through your chat to Gustavo, and Gustavo can help you out, or at all the times when I'm not talking and when I'm kicking back, yes, just send me a direct message. I'll watch the chat and I hope we can resolve all of your issues. Before we now go into anything further, I would like to hand over to Sarah Eccles to give a welcome to country.
Nora, thank you, Frank. And as a Wadawurrung woman or a First Nations woman from Southern Australia, I'd just like to start in my mother tongue. Miwang Bengedik King Kimbil, Wordi Garong Guling Wadawurrung, Wadawurrung Ik Guli, Wadawurrung Ja. I acknowledge and call our Wadawurrung spirit. Creator spirit from ancestors, family, and community. Wadawurrung spirit is connected to country. I also acknowledge the central role and diversity of our Indigenous people across the world that continue to care for our land, waters, earth, and sky. Pay my respects to all our ancestors, our generations before us that has fought to ensure the continuation of our people, our culture, and our custodianship of country. I acknowledge the resilience and struggles of many of our First Nations or our Indigenous people and what they face in continuing to care for country today. The leadership and strength this takes to care for land and waters across the globe and our contributions to conservation. I also acknowledge here those that walk alongside us in this journey, such as many of you on the call, with the wealth of knowledge that you do have, so that all our future generations may have healthy waters and lands to continue to live from and care for. Nyatne, thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Very beautiful words. And from here, I think it would be probably for you guys all very helpful to know what we're doing today. So I just thought I'd quickly run you through the session agenda. We already worked through the introductions and so far that everybody could post their arrow on the map. And Sarah just did her acknowledgement to country. I would like to kind of kick off this session with giving a very brief and very quick snapshot on the evolution of healthy country planning. And then, as I said beforehand, we hear from all our co-presenters here in the room. Kicking off with Sarah and Sam talking about their case study in Australia and the challenges and the solutions working with Indigenous communities here. Then we're going to hear from Cristina about her amazing work in Ecuador and Colombia and how she's able to do coaching remotely at the time of a pandemic. We will hear from Irina and Gustavo about the work that they've been doing in coastal Chile, developing a guide to support the planning and managing of marine protected areas with local and indigenous people. And last but not least, we will have from Canada, Paula and Heather presenting on biocultural conservation planning in a partnership in a multi-stakeholder context in the Yukon. Each of those case studies presentation will take roughly 10 minutes. Then we will have a 15-minute breakout session where people can choose to hear from those case studies that they want to hear more about and just join the rooms with them. After the breakout session, we're going to bring it back in the plenary, and the breakout room leaders going to give a quick feedback on what the discussion was about, so we all know what has been spoken about. And then to wrap it all up towards the end, want to do a little bit of promotion about the community of practice, what we're doing. And last but not least, at the end, we're going to do our session presentation, session evaluation for about 5 minutes. So, healthy country planning. How did that all happen? Very early on, in about 2008 and 2010, the journey commenced that brought us to where we are currently. And that was when we started working on the Wunamagambra Healthy Country Plan, the first healthy country plan that was developed in the Kimberleys in the northwest of Australia. Tom Vigilante, who was then with the Kimberley Land Council, who is now with Bush Heritage Australia and the Wunamagambra Original Corporation, and young Stuart Cowell and myself, we worked together on this plan. And we approached the community first, trying to do a conservation action plan, and then shortly after realized that that's not the way to go, and the community told us come back with something slightly better. And from that point in time, I guess this methodology or the adaptation of healthy country planning started commencing. So healthy country planning is an adaptation that we came up with in Australia of the conservation standards. It's very, very closely aligned. It just has some smaller changes to it. Once we started with this initial project, healthy country planning became very popular in Australia. It spread across the north of Australia, in the Northern Territory and into Queensland. And recently it kind of started spreading as well in the southern states of Australia, picking up a bit more momentum down there, and with Indigenous land management kicking off in the southern hemisphere for us. From there, while we were expanding in Australia, healthy country planning started as well finding its footing in other regions and in other countries. Please bear in mind that healthy country planning is not used everywhere in Canada or everywhere in Brazil. I just tended to color in those countries to make it a bit more visible. So since then, we had healthy country plans happening in a part of Myanmar, in Karen state. There is work happening in Brazil. There's work happening in Chile, what we're going to hear later on, Ecuador and Colombia, what we're going to hear from later on, and I guess the great work that is happening in Canada. So what started really humble and small as a tiny little project in the northwest of Australia now is finally being used more in the world, and it is for us all very exciting to hear how we're going to use, how we're going to work better with Indigenous people, and given that Indigenous people play such an incredibly important role in the conservation of our planet. Healthy country planning, or planning with indigenous people, in very short words, kind of is planning for natural, cultural, and socio-economic values side by side. We're talking about a holistic worldview, so we're not restricting ourselves only to biodiversity conservation, but as much to cultural and social well-being. Culture people and their traditional knowledge are very central to healthy country planning. One big part of healthy country planning is bringing together the Western knowledge and traditional knowledge and join it up for better conservation outcomes. Healthy country planning is all about being flexible and being adaptive and working with the local decision-making context and making sure that the governance is in alignment with how community sees the decision-making process. So it is always important to make sure that governance and people and local decision-making are central to the process. And the second last point is we're trying to use language that is clear and locally relevant. And we're going to hear in the case studies from others how they solve this issue to make it easy for everyone to participate in the process. And similar, and we're going to hear more from Sarah about that in particular, it's a highly visual process. So we're gonna try and make sure that literacy and numeracy are not necessarily barriers to our conservation work, but that we find ways around it to create products that are accessible for the whole community that we're working with. That is really just a super quick snapshot of what healthy country planning and working with indigenous communities is about. And with that, I would like to hand it over to our first presenters of a case study. And that would be Sam and Sarah telling us about their experience in Australia.
Okay, thank you, Frank, and good morning, everyone from Brooming, Western Australia. As Frank has mentioned, we've been using healthy country planning in the north for a long time now, and when I think of it, what we do, it really is about working with old people, working with the Indigenous communities, and getting back to country, which means getting back to the traditional lands of the people we're working with, because that's where people connect with each other, with the land, about what we're talking about, and it's where the magic happens, around the campfires in the evenings or in the morning, and getting people back out. And so mixing that being on country with the traditional meeting kind of setting is how we do it. So we don't sit under a tree or sit in a classroom all day. We like to go and have field trips and visit cultural sites to get people more context about what we're trying to do here. This picture to the far right is what a typical healthy country camp might look like. We've got old people and young people. We're camping out for a few days and really trying to get people comfortable and talking, because some of the typical sort of meeting settings people find uncomfortable and won't open up. We rely heavily on people like Jessica down the bottom left as a cultural translators to help us work out the governance for the people we're working with. So often we use Jessica to help us whether we need to break up into groups like women's groups and men's groups, because often people need to talk about different things separately from other people. We also rely heavily on the community we work with to help us navigate through cultural differences and cultural families and clans. And without them, it doesn't work. We often integrate with art centres or cultural groups to bring more people into the process. So here we have the Badi Jawi Healthy Country Plan, a picture we engage some local artists in it. And then we have the Garajari dancers there to the right. So we often have dancing when we're out on country, just to bring other people in and create a lot more fun about the processes that we're dealing with. Thanks, Frank. So yeah, we've been doing it for a long time now, and we've learnt a lot. And a lot of the groups that we work with are at the end of their plans, and they've been doing some amazing jobs. Some groups haven't been using their plans as much, and some a little bit. And there's a lot of reasons around that. And one of the big reasons is a lot of transient support staff. So when these are hard jobs. They're often remote, they're often stretched, not much support. So people come and go a lot, which is a bit of an issue. So we really got to start looking at people like young Winston up the top right here and helping train up local people. And more we are getting requests from the groups that we work with that they don't want a consultant to just come in and out. They want to train up their local people. They want to make sure the skills stay in the communities that are doing the projects, which is fantastic. And we even work that into the budgets and the proposals that we're starting with early on in the project. Sorry, Frank. We also, another big issue is a lot of the information gets lost when people come and go. So trying to identify tech savvy people like Mervyn here, who's got cultural authority but is good with computers, is really important too. And identifying those people in the project team is really important to keep that corporate knowledge strong. We find that, there's a lot of flurry of information, a lot of excitement about getting the plan to the printers and launching the plan. And then obviously a lot of the support drops off. So to keep the plan alive, there's a lot more support in the North now about NERIs, or what we call checkups, doing checkups on the plan. So having the annual or biannual checkups with the teams that we work with over the years is really important to sort of keep people in touch with their plans and avoid that project creep that sets in as new coordinators and new support staff come into the communities. Next slide, please, Frank. So just a very short snapshot here today from me, but I really encourage you all to identify and mentor local staff from the get-go, from the very point that you're talking to the communities that you're working with. Try and think about how you can integrate healthy country planning into everyday activities, whether it's simple communication products like posters in the ranger offices or having those little checkups is really important. Having regional get-togethers or having someone on the ground that you just call up, or you can pop in for an hour and just check in with the team about how they're going. This is so important because it's so easy just to forget about this stuff. I'm going to hand over to Sarah now to talk about her example in Southern Australia. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Sam. So I'm going to have a yarn about my role as a Wadawurrung woman working as a project officer and co-facilitator in developing our Palette Jara Jara Let's Make Country Good Together country plan. So during 2018 to 20, I was contracted to support my community to do this. And I guess I come to it as one of those examples that Sam refers to, in that I'd been working, or I worked for Bush Heritage Australia, so I have had quite a bit of healthy country or open standards training and mentoring along the way. And so was able to apply this directly with working with my own mob. And I want to do a bit of a shout out too. So we had consultants, conservation management work alongside us. So Sam's co-workers, Al, Derma and Sarah Kuma, who's on the call today, I noticed, and had the privilege to be able to be mentored for many years by Stuart Cowell and other members on this call. I'll just get you to go to the next one, please. So just a little bit of context about my country and what we were working for. So it's 1 million hectares in Southern Australia, so quite a different experience or different context, but very much similar lessons learned and experiences in developing our country plan. Of that 1 million hectares, it's a mixture of, ridge country, volcanic grasslands, woodlands, coastal country and sea country. Excuse me. But importantly for Wadawurrung people, we've been quite dispossessed. So our elders have been unable to pass on culture and knowledge over years and have been taken from parts of their country. So today, across that 1 million hectares, 80% of that is what we call private lands or freehold, and lots of housing estates and agricultural industries. And then the other 20% is public land, so national parks and reserves. And we really don't have much decision-making or influence over our country. Out of all of that, we have 40 hectares we have full legal control over. But we've developed up as part of the process a Wadawurrung country plan 10-minute video. So if you wanted to know a bit more about the country and our actual plan and the experience, then we're going to share that to the community page. If you could go to the next one, thanks. So just a few things about what was important for us. So really important for us was about the Aboriginal governance protocols on cultural practices in developing the plan and the process, as Frank said. So Wadawurrung Traditional and Aboriginal Corporation is our corporation through which we care for country and look after country and do our cultural heritage management business. And so we attracted funds to have Wadawurrung Corporation lead this. So from a board level, lead the process, lead the communications, and have real leadership around it. So it was our plan and had cultural legitimacy at the end of that. But one of the things that we were really struggling with was, being able to reach out to our people, and the fact that we have so many different land and water management authorities, over 30 that we have to work with and that come and consult and work with us. So we found that communication tools were really essential, and so made the choice to communicate through video. And so we had a series of short videos as we went along the way that we encouraged community to get involved with and told them where the plan was up to. And then that's been developed into the 10-minute video that I've mentioned, which has been such a valuable resource for us to share our story, to share our culture, share our country, and what we want for it. We also did a summary plan that's about 10 pages long. Oh, wow, freak. I'm going to have to hurry to do this. That was 10 pages long, and that's been a really valuable one. I'll get you to go to the next page. And I guess importantly, a poster version. So that goes up on the wall now for our workers and our staff, and that really helps us know what at the top is the green, the values we care about, or the targets, our threats, and our 3 program areas. So it's a really good visual. What are we all working together for on a daily basis? And I guess some of the other important things was weaving language throughout that to strengthen the language of our people and reaffirm it. When we did the actual process, we come to country. Next one, please, Frank. We come to country, and it was always about actual cultural practices while we were planning. And so what was really important was to have our time together, our young, our old, learning and reigniting our practices, but to then have someone like Saras and Al to be able to wrap around who really know the open standards process well, so that the flexibility. So over the 2 years, it was a bit by bit on country trips. And then we had a smaller family group that worked with male, female representatives on the goals, the strategies, the actions, the harder bits of the plan. So it was such a good, valuable one for us. And the flexibility to be able to chop and change, as really the focus for community was coming together and being on country and connecting with each other and connecting with culture. Next one, Frank. So I guess the important lessons for us was about developing the good communications, and we're very happy to share all those, as I've mentioned, and they've continued to be really valuable for us as a small group that do a lot and dealing with lots of different stakeholders. Governance that follows cultural protocols, to take the time to go through the process and really be flexible with what community needs are. And one that I haven't quite touched on is managing stakeholders' input to empower Aboriginal voice and control. So we made the decision early on that we would develop our plan as a community first, and then we went out to the stakeholders and we had a big workshop with all the different stakeholders who have responsibilities in our country, and we shared so that we had our vision, our dream for country, our voice and what we wanted before we had all these other different perspectives and needs coming in. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And in order to kind of stay on time, I shall hand over to our next presenter, and that would be Cristina, talking about the work she's been doing with communities in our journey. Cristina.
Thank you, Frank. Well, hello, my name is Cristina Lasch, and I work with the Nature Conservancy, and I help coordinate operations for CCNet, and I am based in Mérida, Yucatan, in the beautiful land of the Maya in Mexico. And today I will share with you the work we have been doing on applying healthy country planning for community-based freshwater conservation in the Andean Amazon in Ecuador and Colombia. The next one, please. So the Andean Amazon is a place where the rivers are born that then feed into the Amazon basin. And here on the map, you can see that in yellow is the territories that are owned by indigenous nations. And the Nature Conservancy is working in this region, and especially we decided to start to work in the Napo and the Caquetá sub-watersheds in this region, so one in Ecuador and one in Colombia. And for these, we conducted a conservation standards planning process to identify strategies that we could apply for freshwater conservation that is led by communities. So the project focuses on supporting and strengthening capacities of these communities so that they can sustainably manage their land and water through the application of several different tools. The next one, please. So what we started out with was that I trained my TNC colleagues in Ecuador and Colombia virtually through a series of 2-hour-long virtual trainings where we would cover the theory of each step, and then we had practical exercises in small groups. And we used a combination of Zoom, Google Slides, and Jamboard. And I was lucky enough that we have these great materials shared by Frank and Stuart and others on healthy country planning. So I was able to build on those presentations, translate them to Spanish, and just add some complementary materials or examples from Latin America. And we also translated the healthy country planning reference cards. If you can click the next, please. Right. So we have the reference cards, and the next one, please. And we are combining also other approaches in this effort. So there is a guidance that we're using for the development of management plans that have an environmental and cultural focus, also gender equity, and the Strong Voices, Active Choices framework of the Nature Conservancy. Next, please. So the Napo watershed in Ecuador, they are both huge watersheds. So within these, we selected 2 communities to collaborate with. And one is the Rucuyacta territory, which is actually 17 communities, and they are managed jointly by their Quechua leaders. And the other one is the Aicofan Sinangoe community. Next one, please. The other watershed in Colombia is the Caquetá, also another huge sub-watershed. And there we are collaborating with 10 different communities. 5 of these are Murui, Muina, Huitoto, and the other 5 are Coreguaje and Maqueguaje territory. Next, please. So in the Napo watershed, they did have a life plan in Rucuyacta. And there, our focus was on incorporating freshwater diversity and aspects of the Voice and Choice for Action framework. We hired a Quechua consultant who conducted interviews in the 17 communities, and that enabled us to produce a really good first draft situation analysis that we could then review with the community leaders of Rucuyacta through virtual meetings because they have a stable internet connection. And then once that had been reviewed by them, we went ahead and had a first in-person one-day planning workshop where we worked on the first draft of the whole conservation plan as a first iteration. And with that information, we were then able to jointly develop a work plan with the community leaders of Rucuyacta and TNC. And funding has been provided and the implementation is happening jointly. And if you can click the next 3. So here's some examples of the type of information that we incorporated in our data collection and analysis, and some of the pictures of our virtual and in-person meetings, and then the joint plan. Next one, please. So still in the Napo watershed in Ecuador, but now in Sinangoe, They did not have a life plan yet, so we had to develop the whole planning information with them. And in this case, we held a 2-day planning workshop with community representatives. And we also produced a first draft conservation plan, which was revised with the ICOFAN leaders. And with that information, we then produced the respective work plan for joint application. And we simplified exercises and ranking formats. And we also produced some templates to document information when we don't have a lot of people on the ground. Because, for example, I have not been directly working with these communities. It's my colleagues in Ecuador and Colombia. The next ones, please. So actually in the next picture, you see people holding up some colored papers, and that's how they would rank things, by holding up their papers during COVID times. Next slide, please. So now moving on to Colombia in the Caquetá watershed. Again, we are working with 10 different communities there. And in this case, it's different because they did have management plans and they needed to be updated, but freshwater had not really been considered in these plans as a central component. So we are working with local community planners to train them so they can facilitate the update of their own management plans. And we are also working with consultants, and TNC staff are accompanying the process, but it's really the local planners who are conducting the work. Next slide, please. So some examples here, you will probably know the vision compass, but in the case of the communities in the Caquetá, they don't really use a compass, but they said, oh, this looks like a cassava cake. So it was adapted to, it's the cassava cake to establish a vision. We also incorporated aspects such as participatory mapping. Next one, please. And planners have been learning to conduct semi-structured interviews to gather information in their communities. The circle that you see there is the calendar of activities that happen throughout the year. And then we also ask who makes those activities, women or youth or elders. And we are also incorporating the management of intercultural knowledge. And the example in the middle is an exercise for ranking targets and problems. And we asked women and men for their perception. And as you see, sometimes they coincide, but sometimes there's slight differences in these perceptions. And the last one, we also produced some worksheets which are similar to the reference cards, where step-by-step participants know what they need to focus on, but we also produced a separate set of worksheets for participants to take notes and to decide what they would need in order to make this work in their community. So that helps us also to give them more focused attention and support. Next slide, please. So recapping some of our lessons learned, virtual training and meetings can work for some, but it takes a lot of preparation. And we discovered new ways of working, which can add efficiency. Like I mentioned, hiring local consultants from the indigenous communities can be great. Developing templates and support materials that we could use in other cases. We boiled down the exercises to the bare bones, because we had to do some of these things in 1 day or 2 days. And we developed practical ways to document information. What else can I share? For training the planners, a detailed facilitator agenda has been great. And then the step-by-step participant guidance and note sheets, they have also been very useful. And we have incorporated equity and inclusion as a cross-cutting theme throughout the process. So thinking about activities for the children to do so the women can actively participate, or constructing the history of the community or a timeline from the perspective of elders, both women and men, and youth and children and women and men. That has been really enriching. And although we would have liked to see more women be trained as planners, the communities decide who will be trained. And in this instance, we have more men than women. So we're still working on that. And I have a question for all of you, and I know my time is up, but we are thinking about how we can link information from the participatory mapping processes in a way so that it really contributes to management decisions and possibly even to the zoning, which can be legally binding, even when we cannot ground truth all the data or digitize everything. So that would be it from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cristina, for that. Exciting to hear about your work. And with that, we go straight away a little bit further south on the globe, and we're gonna travel to Chile, and we will hear from Irina and Gustavo about the work that they've been doing.
Thank you, Frank. Hello, everyone. Well, I'm Irina Montenegro, and along with Gustavo, we are going to share with you this project. Gustavo and me have been working on conservation standard for many years ago, and both along with Cristina, Anita, and Eduardo, coordinate the Latin American CCNet regional network. And we have the opportunity to participate and contribute to this project. This project was an initiative led by WWF-Chile with the sponsorship of Foro Mar Patagónico and Oceans 5. And that beautiful picture is a picture of the local community of Raúl Balmaceda, who are, along with the Ministry of Environment, the co-administrators of the multiple use marine protected area of Pitipalena and Ñuble. Next. Thank you. So just to give you a little overview about what the Chile is marine protected areas, Chile has experienced a significant increase of the declaration of coastal and marine protection. In fact, 42%, around 42% of their sea is under any category of protected area. However, the declaration does not guarantee the effective management of protected areas. And that was one of the reasons, because the country has been working strongly on the designing adequate measures to come that come from a systematic and well-planned design that will advance towards an effective management of those protected areas. Next. Yes, so what I would like just to do is just to give you a little background about the WWF-Chile and the work that they are doing in Chile. So they started in 2002, and nowadays they have a marine program among other programs that is aims at restoring and protecting coastal and marine environments through a solid planning process, strengthening governance mechanisms, and ensuring financial sustainability. A couple of years ago, WWF-Chile, together with key partners, started to develop a model for the effective management of marine protected areas. And you can see in the different colors, like the enabling conditions that they identified in order to promote a wider participation of local communities and indigenous peoples, to secure a better good governance, the conditions for adequate financial sustainability, and the proper implementation of the management plans related with that. So regarding to the second point, that was the work that it started in this marine protected area that I mentioned before, Pitipalena and Ñuble, and it was also under this enabling condition that the guide was produced. Next. So these are a couple of opportunities and challenges that motivates the creation of this guide. So first of all, their conservation standards are adopted by national environmental authorities. You know that there's a case of the CONAF, the Forest Services, that who wants one of the CCNet's a contest regarding the one of the experience, and is related with it using conservation standards in protected areas planning. Also, there are national and regional capacities on conservation standards in the country and in the region, but also in protected areas planning. However, most of those tools are too technical and not necessarily are addressing indigenous people and local communities because they are to understand. And the other side, the other challenge that they have to do is that most of those tools are oriented to protected areas, but not necessarily to other environmental mechanisms for conservation. Next. Gustavo?
Thanks, Irina. Now let me use a couple of minutes to tell you a bit of how we use different existing methods and principles to adapt this guide we developed and how it is structured. Well, to structure this guide, we started from the vision of modern management of third-generation marine protected areas. According to this vision, the third-generation protected areas are those that are managed considering that the protected territory maintains a series of social, economic, and ecosystemic relationships with the entire landscape in which it is immersed. And that in order to protect it, these relationships must be understood and managed. This complexity is one of the reasons that leads us to promote collaborative management and participatory governance, which must be the basis for strategic planning processes. This is reflected on the 12 principles of the ecosystem approach from CBD, which this guide helps to promote as well. In addition, we incorporated other elements of modern planning like inclusiveness and negotiation and multi-scale vision. At the same time, we relied on the 5 IUCN principles of good governance in protected areas. We adopted these principles as an ethical framework for the proper exercise of power in the management of those marine protected areas. Then we adapted the conservation standards methodological steps, and it's in special the healthy country planning's work served as the main reference, basis, and inspiration for making the adaptations which adjusts the standards to a social context with different actors who have different demands for the use and conservation of their natural resources. Next one, please. Other aspect we made an effort about was language adaptation. Some terms or concepts have been modified to make them more familiar to an audience unfamiliar to this type of instrument without altering the logic behind them and their function in the proposed methodological framework. For example, for targets, we suggested the term focal elements, and instead of viability analysis, we would suggest taking the temperature of the focal elements, for example. We also used some local daily activities as analogies to the planning steps to tailor language. For example, we suggested identifying where the storms come from instead of saying situation analysis. The approach used to this guide's adaptation adds complementary elements for social contexts, such as governance and stakeholders management in step 1, or mapping and definition of management zones for the protected areas in step 2, and adapting the protected areas management plans in step 4, for example. And now to the bottom of right bottom of the slide, you can see the structure that we use to provide the information about each of the important step of the guide. reflecting the steps of the healthy country planning methodology as well. We have a first one with the overview of each part of each step, and then there's a part dedicated to inform or to ask why will we need this step for, and how to do that step would be the next part, with specific recommended actions and tasks, and also a less portion with suggestions for success, which complementary actions to so that the planners and managers could use. Well, back to you, Irina.
Thank you, Gustavo. So we would like just to recap a couple of lessons learned. The first is essential to generate capacity building conditions on key audiences, especially those that are working on other environmental conservation mechanisms, in order to reduce knowledge asymmetry. So in addition to the guide, one of the recommendations is just to work also in the creation of facilitators that facilitate the work with the authorities, but also with these key stakeholders. The other lessons learned is that it is important just to analyze the principle of participation, especially in terms of the governance mechanisms and also the category of the marine protected areas, because the guide is general and usually most applicable to multiple use marine protected areas, but we have to take into consideration other governance mechanisms. And finally, it is essential to make the key stakeholders aware of the implication of the stage of formalization of the planning process, because even though the guide just give us the different steps about how to design the management plan and how to operate them, there's a formal steps that are more related with the regulation, with the national regulation, that you have to take into consideration also in the time framework of management plans. And that's it. The next one, Frank, please. Yes, and this is the technical writers of this guide, and also the link if you would like to have access to the version in English and in Spanish. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Irina and Gustavo. And I may add that this guide in Spanish and in English can be downloaded from the Community of Practice homepage that I'm going to show you at the end. And now, last but not least, I would like to take us on a journey up north towards the Yukon, and we shall hear from Heather and from Paula about the work that they're doing in their multi-stakeholder project over there.
Thank you, Frank. Hello, everyone. My name is Paula Patchlock, and I'm a senior policy analyst with the Canadian Wildlife Service. I'm very excited to be leading this collaborative conservation planning initiative in the Yukon. And Heather and I will jump into telling our story today. So next slide, please. Frank, thanks. So Heather, Barna, and I will tell you a bit about the Yukon South Beringia Priority Place, where we've embarked on a hybrid conservation standard and healthy country planning process. I'll quickly set out the background, and then Heather will tell the rest of the story. Next slide, Frank. So Yukon South Beringia Priority Place is in Canada, north of 60, as you can see, next to Alaska. The place overlaps with several Yukon First Nations traditional territories, most of which are self-governing First Nations with settled land claims. It's a very large area defined by geology and existing land use planning areas, as well as a shared boundary with the United States. Several years ago, the Canadian Wildlife Service, the department I work for, determined there was a need to change how we're doing our business and transform our approach to conservation with regards to species at risk. And following a stock-taking exercise dating back to about 2016, 2017, an approach was laid out along with an announcement in our federal budget in 2018 about not only establishing but supporting 11 priority places across Canada, with one of them being in the Yukon. This is a story about meeting a need to accelerate progress, align our efforts, guide collaboration with a number of partners. And we've moved from focusing on species to consider multiple species, and rather than focusing on site specifics, looking at broader ecosystem functions and taking a more coordinated strategic approach. And although this is not an Indigenous-led process, we reached out to many of our First Nation partners early on to determine their interest. And several of them who did have an interest have roles in our partners working group and on the executive committee. And we've decided to provide them with funding to participate and engage in conservation conversations at all our tables. So again, it's an opportunity to advance our conservation efforts by working with a group of people and to develop an integrated conservation action plan. And the drivers for this area are because of the multiple species, the high biodiversity, the pressures from the type of land uses in this space as well. Next slide, Frank. So we have a unique working group of partners who are committed to a formal governance structure in terms of reference. They've agreed to a scope and a shared vision and have been very open to work with a hybrid approach. So we have a number of partners, and those partners have evolved over the years, bringing different perspectives and different biases and positions to the table. Their capacity of individual organizations has waxed and waned. And we've been fortunate to have Heather come along and help us coach and teach our partners along the way. And we've really focused on braiding that Indigenous knowledge and Western science. And the partners work together to identify 11 biocultural values. And unfortunately, given some time constraints, we've had to focus in on 3 values right now. And over the past several months, the partners have been able to go through a process of assessing the health of the values, identifying pressures. We're really now at that exciting stage of identifying strategies to populate an integrated conservation action plan. And I'll pass over the rest of the presentation to Heather.
Thank you, Paula. Hi, everyone. So exciting to be together around the world and to be talking about planning with Indigenous peoples. And no one has jet lag. So how amazing is that? As Paula mentioned, I joined the Yukon South Beringia project about a year ago to help co-design and facilitate the biocultural planning process. And I'll be describing a few of the highlights of how we've worked together over the last year. Participatory planning hinges obviously on partner engagement, and we have constantly adjusted over time how we work together to maintain that participation and to have an engaged group of partners. Certainly, the more partners that come together, the more competing priorities there are. We've needed to slow down a few times when other priorities like land use planning processes took precedence, and then try and make up that time later on. Another challenge that we've really felt to engagement has been working virtually through the pandemic. In person, on the land discussions offer many planning co-benefits to Indigenous communities, such as storytelling across generations, language transfer, and strengthening connections to the land. Collectively, the partners, the team has worked creatively to maintain participation, and we've done that through a number of supports. As Paula mentioned, the sponsor, Canadian Wildlife Service, committed multi-year capacity building support for First Nation participation, which has meant that their contribution, their time hasn't come off the side of someone's already full desk or the back of their pickup truck. We've also really emphasized and consciously worked to make time for relationship building, given that distance of working virtually. We've tried to make time for partners to build relationships, for trust to evolve, for a friendly camaraderie to evolve so that working together is fun. And we've also had a fair amount of success using interactive online tools. And this really has helped us so that everyone participating effectively controls the mouse, is shaping content and driving the planning process. There's certainly a tendency in these large group processes for the actors to kind of sit back passively and watch the show. So we've used these interactive tools to try and bring everyone into that active thinking space. Next, please. The other dimension that has really stood out is the inclusivity of how the team has worked together. And right from the very beginning, the partners were committed to weaving traditional knowledge and Western science together in a good, in an equitable way. Over time, that's taken different forms, and the group process has evolved in a flexible, responsive way. In the earliest conversations around health assessment and around pressure rating, we often had two parallel conversations. So one was with a full group of partners so that we could have that learning from each other and weaving together. And then a separate conversation with the First Nation partners to establish a good space for their voices to have influence and for them to have that extra time to become familiar with the planning framework. We also have, we've also been really conscious about knowledge and skills asymmetries across the partners. So sometimes this has meant that the First Nation partners have really been generous and taken the time to help other partners understand their lenses and views. And sometimes this has meant we as facilitators have taken more time with the First Nation partners to build familiarity with the new plan and framework and with the interactive tools. Next, please. It's still early days in this biocultural planning process, but what we're starting to see now is that this planning approach of bringing together cultural values and Indigenous knowledge with Western science can and seems to be really operationalizing two-eyed seeing. That is, seeing simultaneously through lenses of Indigenous knowledge and Western science. Second, how we have worked together has allowed for exchanges of stories across partners and has strengthened the collective understanding of conservation and the stewardship work that is needed. Third, and I really can't emphasize this enough, but participatory planning takes a massive amount of time for partners to build those relationships, the trust and the understanding of different perspectives, for them to become familiar with the planning framework and tools, and for all voices to be heard. In a biocultural project like this, we are thinking across multiple dimensions. We're considering connections across many values, pressures, and capacities. We do believe that the process of conservation planning can be as important as the plan itself, and plans are ultimately implemented by people who are engaged. And so we hope that working in this way will lead to strong implementation. And lastly, we needed to constantly prioritize versus completing everything as we moved on. So as we went through the planning cycle, we brought forward a prioritized subset of values. For our situation model, we were only working on the pressures that were most highly rated, and we're moving on to results chains for, again, the strategies that were most highly rated by the group. And I'll just close, thank you, Frank, next with saying thank you. Thank you so much to all of the partners on behalf of Paula and myself within the Yukon South Beringia project. For their generous sharing of insights and knowledge and contributing to this biocultural conservation planning process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Heather and Paula, for that presentation. Very exciting. With that, we shall now stop the one-way presenting for a little bit. And we want to give you a chance to learn more about each of the case studies by jumping in a breakout room for each of the studies. We are not going to allocate people, so we let you choose yourselves. I will open all the rooms. Myself, I will stay in the plenary. If anybody got questions, they can come always and jump out. And we are planning to do this now for probably 15 minutes max. There's going to be a warning timer 2 minutes before the end of the time coming up for all of you. And yeah, I guess I'll let you choose your case studies and then jump in the rooms and have more of a conversation with everyone. Thank you very much. Well, I do hope that everyone's breakout rooms worked out well, and I dare say, let's hear back from you guys. Given that breakout room 1 was Australia, maybe Sam and Sarah, you can kind of give a quick feedback to all of us what the conversation was about in your breakout room.
Sure. Thanks, Frank. Yeah, look, we had a nice small group, so it was very casual yarning, but we talked a bit about communities and you know, the cohesive communities and communities that have lots of factions and that have challenges and how we can tackle that, or what's the best we can do in those situations. We talked a bit about the importance of the MERI monitoring evaluation, or what we call checkups, and how we do that in Australia. Do we use tools like Marathi and databases, and how do we, we talked about how we're setting up positions now that aid groups in the north up here. And what else, Sarah? What else did we talk about?
I guess whether we're seeing change and getting, the experience of change through the plans, and whether the traditional owner groups or Indigenous groups are, seeing changes in their country and their people. And I guess for both of us, we are in different kind of contexts, and yes, definitely seeing that, although I acknowledge some groups have amazing plans, but they're not always followed through. And for my experience in the South, where you don't have any kind of full or legal control over your country, it's influencing other plans and helping to mesh cultural perspectives and values into those plans.
Yeah, and we also talked about, in Australia, in our context, we're quite lucky. We've got a lot of federal funding for protected areas and Indigenous ranger programs. We have some carbon projects in the north that give funds to, we have strong Indigenous regional bodies. So we're quite lucky we have resources to support some of this stuff that we're talking about.
And I think the other really nice pickup was the analogy of perhaps what we do as a slow food planning, in taking the right time together at the start and going through the planning process, so that has that strength ongoing and lasts the test of time. And that while that's really valuable, it's also quite a challenge in a time where we're seeing such a destruction and threats of country.
Terrific.
Conversely, I expressed some concern that, you can get a logging concession in 6 months, while we sit around for 3 or 4 years planning sensitively. And the time we've got our plan and we're ready to go, we turn our backs and the resource is gone. So
yeah, thanks, Bruce. There's definitely always a risk trying to find the right speed for everyone, like between the speed of when a community moves and the speed when pressures move. That's definitely tricky. I shall hand over to Cristina and hear what your room about Chile and Colombia and Ecuador was talking about.
Thanks, Frank. So in our group, we also had a very casual conversation, and I answered some of the questions. So one question was how the concept of country really translated to the projects in Ecuador and Colombia, and country being a very inclusive, comprehensive way of thinking. And actually we found that it translated really well for the nations that we're working with. It's also seen as a holistic living being. It's not just, you know, some soil that you step on, but it's really everything that's alive there, the ancestors. There's a lot of freshwater spirits and sacred places in the Amazon. So that was very interesting, and we didn't have a problem with it. Sorry for the folkloric noise. It's the bread man passing by. And so we did translate the actual word that we used. We called it planificación para territorios saludables. So for healthy territories, because that was the term that, you know, suited us more closely, but the concept, I think, translates really well. Then there was another question about sharing something that we learned from failure. And I said, I have plenty of things to share in that regard. And I'm sure we're collecting more on failures. And as we all know, you know, we learn best from failure. You know, when we bake a bread and it turns out lousy, next time we will pay more attention, right? So it's the same in our conservation work. And I shared something on, you know, when I started training our staff, the first question was, do we know conservation planning or the conservation standards? And the response was, oh, yeah, we know it. And then when we started getting into the process, I realized that no, we actually had to go back and do some training. So that was not part of the initial thing I had signed up for. So I ended up doing it in the evenings and weekends because I had to translate everything to Spanish and set up interactive exercises that we could then do virtually. But it was a very rewarding process, and I hope that I can share those materials. I need to clean them up a bit before being able to share, but I will coordinate with Frank so we can share those. And what else? Then there was a question about how we incorporated equity and inclusion. And there was a really cool exercise that the consultants proposed in the Caquetá watershed, where they ask the communities to tell the story on a timeline. And they took old magazines and newspapers and things with pictures to the community. And they separated people out, like there was a group of grandmothers, of grandfathers, of youth, men and women separately. And they were asked to tell the story of where did your community come from? What are the origins of your community? And tell the story up to today and any major things that you would describe in the story of your community. And then they had to share this in plenary, and the feedback was amazing that, you know, some of the young people, when they heard the grandfathers or grandmothers, they said, we didn't know that about our community. And likewise, you know, just hearing the perspective of the young people gave new insights into the project. And this was done early on. And then we also had like a workshop where we were planning for 20 people because of COVID, and about 60 people showed up, and a lot of them being children. So on the fly, one of the facilitators, she just, you know, put down papers for the children to do some activities. And then for the next exercises in the next workshops, we actually planned for like students or someone to help us engage the children in a meaningful way. So maybe they can draw the values of the project. So that's some of the things we learned. And engaging the elders in the ceremonies before the process begins, and then at the end as well, and ask them questions and incorporate their perspectives has been really valuable. And we got feedback from some of them that people were stopping to do this, and they really felt valued that, you know, they are being considered and that we're engaging them. And that's what we're training the planners to do, because that's the way things were done. This is nothing new, but people stopped doing it. So that would be my report.
Terrific. Thank you very much, Cristina. The next room would be Irina and Gustavo. Would you like me to bring up your the Google slide for your room, or you're gonna just talk to us?
I think if we just talk, it's okay. Enough of the slides. Okay, so we discussed a little bit both the difficulty and the importance as well of engaging the indigenous peoples and local communities early in the design phase, and also the importance of motivating them to participate during the planning process. It's not easy. We don't have a general solution for that, but we just highlighted the importance of their participation from the beginning. And it has relation as well with capacity building, because there are different levels of knowledge in the beginning of the process, and we should try as most as possible to balance different levels of prior knowledge in the process. And a careful design of the process is probably very necessary to pay a lot of attention so that it can be addressed. And also strengthen the capacity from the beginning by adjusting the language, as already mentioned, and using local examples as well. And we also discussed the importance of involving local peoples and indigenous peoples in the monitoring process. That is somehow an empowerment tool as well, so that the communities, they can carry out the monitoring themselves as much as possible, at least. And how to come up with some participatory monitoring tools is also a challenge, but a very important aspect to take into consideration as well. And we also, we discussed that would be very nice to have, in the specific case of the marine protected areas, which we were presenting to you guys, that we could have a common set of indicators that could be applied in other situations as well, across projects. So that's probably something that we should join forces between us coaches and try to come out with some common indicators would be something interesting. And also the importance to have pilot projects so that lessons can be learned in the case that our new guide is just new and has been published recently. So the importance of having a pilot project and reflecting and coming out with lessons so that others can also take advantage of the lessons that we can learn from a pilot project, and also to adapt the guides for the marine protected areas based on those lessons. I think that was it. If somebody else would like to complement.
Well, thank you very much, Gustavo and Irina, and everyone in the room for the case study in Chile. And now the last room to report back, it would be Paula and Heather. Would you like me to bring up your slide, or are you happy to just talk?
I think it will be fine to not have the slide, Frank, and I'll take the lead with the speaking, and Paula and anyone else in our group jump in by all means. So we had a lot of questions, and so we kind of covered a lot of ground, but probably didn't go deep in any particular area. We had questions about this not being an Indigenous-led project, and so what leadership role did the First Nation partners have? And so we talked a bit about their role on the, as active partners in the planning process as well as in the executive, and how we, maybe we didn't go into this in a lot of detail, but what we have strived for is it to be very grassroots and very driven by all of the partners. I think ultimately the reality is that the partners have all their other priorities, and so a lot of the kind of design and the planning does fall in Paula's and my lap, but the ability for leadership is wide open. We talked a little bit about terminology changes, and some of you have spoken to kind of translating healthy country planning, conservation standards, and using local language. Again, we've been really keen for that to happen, for the Tranda Cochin and the Nachanite done to kind of bring suggestions forward, and we haven't got there yet, but we have our fingers crossed. We also had questions about what does sacred relationship mean, and how is that showing up in the planning? And actually Molly from Eastern Canada gave an example from her project where they conducted ceremony before initiating the planning process. We haven't in the last year, because of the pandemic, in part used ceremony, but that sacredness of the relationship between the First Nations and the land is throughout. So it shows up in all of what they value and all of the knowledge that they bring forward. It really permeates everything. We also talked about the difference of this plan, where it's for such a large area and not all of it is under the governance of the First Nations. And we, Tanya shared some examples from Australia of tenure blind planning or planning for whole of country. And it's very similar in the Yukon project, where as Paul mentioned, multiple First Nation traditional territories overlap the planning area. And so, you know, their connection to land, again, is pervasive throughout the planning area, and their knowledge and their values. And so we really kind of took that approach of what are the strategies that would support connection to traditional territories. I think we kind of were wrapping up talking about, oh yes, the different ways in which the group has worked. Sometimes we've worked as, you know, had conversations as one whole group, and sometimes we've had a bit of a split of a whole group conversation and then an additional First Nations conversation, and that kind of split in the planning process had happened for other groups in our breakout, and they were really hoping that they could reunite, and we're, I guess, kind of curious to see what the circumstances were in the Yukon South Beringia process for the reuniting. And we just spoke a little bit about it being, you know, like, we try to be responsive to where the group is at and where the different actors are at. And when the First Nations indicated that they enjoyed the opportunity to have those conversations as a whole and didn't feel they needed to, you know, have the conversation twice, that's the approach that we have taken. Yeah, I think that's roughly what we covered. Paula, do you want to add anything?
I think you covered everything, Heather.
Okay.
Terrific. Thank you very much, Heather and Paula. As you heard in the case studies in the presentation, and probably what you discussed as well in your breakout rooms, there's been a whole heap of resources and things that are happening, that have been developed, things that are happening, processes around the world, materials, articles that get published. I want to just use the remaining few minutes that we have in our session to give you an idea where you can find all those great resources. And the we created out of rally sessions previously the community of practice conservation standard projects with indigenous communities on indigenous lands and waters. And thanks to the amazing help from Cristina of curating with me together this virtual space, we got a virtual landing place, a small homepage as part of the wider CCNet global homepage that you can find under the networks, and then as the community of practice indigenous CS projects topic. On this page, we got a few different things. For example, very recently, I humbugged a lot of you people developing a map of indigenous conservation standards projects. The idea of this community of practice and of this map is to network all of you. We are all often live in isolation in our respective corners of the world. And sometimes we want to reach out and get fresh ideas from people from other geographies. And we do hope that this community of practice will help achieve that, to improve our practice of conservation, and in particular in regards to how we engage with indigenous and local communities. This map, for example, I'll use Irina's project, gives you an idea of the project. It lets you reach out to either the website, or if you want to get directly in touch with Irina because you got any other questions from her presentation, it gives you an ability to reach out to her. And in a similar fashion, we want that to grow. How do you get on this map? Send me an email. We developed a PDF form for people to join up. This map is slightly different than another map that is on and that Felix Cebula curated of all the conservation standard projects in the world. And that map here is in so far different that it is curated, and that means people cannot enter details or cannot alter details from others. They need to go via me, who is managing this map. So that helps us to safeguard information and make sure that people have the right approvals before they join a map. Aside from this map, we got as well resources that we post up here. We got resources regarding healthy country planning, all those presentations that Cristina referred to and that she used as a guide for her adaptation. And once Cristina's projects mature more, we do hope as well that all those Spanish translations that she's working on, we will be able to post on here. We got a few example healthy country plans from Sarah's project. The healthy country plan that she developed for her traditional lands is posted up there if you want to have a closer look at what what her group is been developing and how that looks like and feels afterwards. We're getting over the years more and more peer-reviewed articles. So any articles, any publications we host here to help us learn from each other. And all the different tools and resources, and some of those that have been mentioned here. There is, for example, a link to the Spanish and the English version of the guide that Irina and Gustavo developed for Chile. There's some of the amazing work that the groups are doing on Hawaii, and their community action guide posted on here as well. Aside from accessing resources, we as well run our own Indigenous projects discussion forum. It's an email listserv that is very much the same than the email listserv that you would know that Cristina is curating for CCNet Global. This one, I guess, specifically for topics that are relevant for local communities and Indigenous projects. If you would like to join our email listserv, just flick me an email. I'll subscribe you and send you instructions how to participate and how to use that. So that is our great page. And yet again, I need to say another time, thank you to Cristina for all her patience in curating that. Cristina got so many different things on, and she still finds the time to help all the different franchises out. So this is very much appreciated. And sorry. So where to from here? As I said to you, if you want to get in touch with any of the presenters today, please check the Community of Practice map. There should be the contact details for all of us on there. If you want to further engage in this Community of Practice, send me an email. We can subscribe you to the listserv or just visit the homepage. The recording from this session will be posted on the YouTube channel from CCNet, and I'll create a simple PDF with all the slides, and this one will be posted on the Google site for the CCNet Rally, and Cristina probably will send through more communication once everyone's session materials are posted there. And oops, sorry. And I'm gonna put now in the chat as well for all of you the link to our session evaluation. And before you guys dial off today, we would really appreciate if you can provide your feedback and improve how we are presenting. And with that, because there's always more things to learn for all of us. We never stop learning. And with that, and very much on time, I would like to say thank you to all of you for joining. It's, for some of you it is late, for some of you it is early. So it was great having you all here. And most of all, I would like to say thank you to this fantastic team of co-presenters from all around the world. It is something really amazing for me to see how far we've come in the last 13, 14 years. And seeing that there is now those projects popping up everywhere around the world. So thank you very much for my great co-presenters, and thank you very much for joining the session.